Hello and welcome to today's webinar on data integrity for materials testing. Thank you for joining us. We'll start with some practical information. So the webinar today is going to be recorded and all participants will be muted, but please feel free to ask questions at any stage using the chat function, and I will try to answer them as we go along. If not, we will also have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So my name is Toby Rogers. I'm the Sales Director at AMETEK Test and AMETEK STC, and I have many years' experience in materials testing, and the majority of those have been involved with medical devices and pharmaceuticals, particularly focusing on software and the data integrity when using software. So the agenda for the webinar, just a brief introduction of who we are. We'll look at some of the typical applications for AMETEK Test and Lloyd Instruments, where we're focused on measuring forces. We'll have a look at the FDA 21 CFR Part 11, and we'll look at data integrity and how those two combine. Then we'll look at the key data integrity features to look for in an application software. And we're going to use the Lloyd Instruments tensile testing software, NexiGen Plus, as a platform to demonstrate the data integrity features, but they're applicable really to any laboratory measuring instrument. And then at the end, we're going to show a full workflow example of using an application software and ensuring that we have good data integrity. A quick introduction. AMETEK Lloyd Instruments are part of the AMETEK business with almost 20,000 employees globally, and AMETEK Lloyd are one of 175 leading brands within the AMETEK organization. And specifically, AMETEK Lloyd Instruments, we're manufacturing tensile compression testing machines used predominantly in research and development and quality control. So this is an example on the screen here of pressing capsules from a blister pack to measure the forces of the packaging. Other typical tests in R&D and quality control, very common, syringes, breakaway force, glide force. And in fact, today, when we do our worked example, looking at workflow, we're going to be looking at measuring the glide force on a syringe and how we ensure data integrity. But many other tests, needle pull out, force to bend the needle. A significant area is measuring the strength of medical packaging, particularly heat seals. But also a lot of general tests on all types of medical devices. So let's start by looking at 21 CFR Part 11, where really is the key area where data integrity is critical. So let's just look at this briefly to understand the context. So really the regulation is defining regulations for the conditions under which regulated companies can submit electronic records in lieu of signed paper documents. So traditionally, a legal document and data integrity was achieved by taking a pen and signing printed reports and then storing those reports for the retention period, which could be many, many years in the pharmaceutical medical device world. Obviously, everybody wants to move to an electronic alternative, and 21 CFR Part 11 gives those conditions and regulations where you can move to electronic documents and records. One key point to make is that an organization's compliance with the regulation is a combination of the application software used on the laboratory instrument itself doing the measurement, but it's also involves an organization's policies and its IT configuration and procedures. It's not the software alone that is compliant. It's an organization that needs to be compliant, and there are many interlinking factors outside of the laboratory software. And in this meeting, we're really going to focus on application software, instrument application software in the laboratory. And we'll show some of the features in there that will help you link into your organization's policies and IT procedures. So what is data integrity? So data integrity refers to the completeness, consistency, and accuracy of data. Complete, consistent, and accurate data should be attributable, legible, contemporaneously recorded, original, and accurate. The common acronym is ALCOA. But really what we're looking at is when we see an electronic record, do we know what happened, when it happened, where it happened, who did it, and why was it done? And what we've got below here is an example of an audit record from an audit trail from the NextGen Plus software, where we can see features such as the full name of the user, which comes from an electronic signature, the date and time, the time zone, the reason why the change was made, and the description of the change, including the values before and after. And we'll look at this in detail as we go through the presentation. So that's the headline facts on data integrity and what we're trying to achieve. So let's look at the ALCOA principles, which allow us to ensure that we've got good data integrity. So attributable is just looking at who created a record and when. Legible is the data in human readable form. Quite simple. Contemporaneous is important. We need to make sure the data is recorded as it's observed in real time. What we need to avoid is any changes to data later. It's got to be recorded there and then and tamper-proof for eternity. The source data's got to be in its original form, and it's got to be accessible, and that comes back to IT infrastructure. And obviously the data has got to be complete and valid and reliable, so accurate. So those are the 5 main ALCOA principles, but there are a further 4 which complete the set. So having collected the data, which we've done in these first 5 principles, that data's then got to be available for the lifetime of the record. And again, that will entail the audit, the IT department, to ensure that those records are stored securely for the retention period. Enduring, again, refers to the retention period. Consistent, we want to make sure everything is in its expected sequence in terms of time. We don't want to see any inconsistencies. And complete is a very important one in a laboratory software. Is there an audit trail to show that no data has been deleted or lost or changed? What we're going to do next is we're going to look at some of the features of a laboratory application software that will help us achieve these principles here. So some of the key software features for data integrity. The first one is to ensure that we have separation of system settings and user management from persons performing the tests. A key part of 21 CFR Part 11 is to make sure that those people that have access to add and remove users to a system must be separated from those who actually use the system and perform tests. And we'll see some examples. Active Directory user management, Windows Active Directory user management significantly enhances the data integrity and reduces validation work, and we'll look at that in more detail. We need the ability also to create group permissions to users and restrict access to functions. And it's critical that we have electronic signatures. We're trying to replace paper records, and we need secure electronic signatures for authorizing changes and signing off on work that's been performed. Detailed audit trails, a must. And obviously the data that is stored needs to be tamper-proof and stored securely. A typical way to do that would be an SQL database. So those are the sort of headline key software features. And now we'll drop into some of those in a little more detail before we look at the worked example. The Active Directory user management is very, very useful. So if a laboratory system can hook up into the Windows Active Directory, then we fulfill a lot of parts of 21 CFR Part 11, assuming your organization's IT policy complies, because user creation is controlled then by the company's IT policy. So any existing procedures you have, such as onboarding new employees where you check their identity, that's all been done. And it also means that if there are any changes to employees, so if an employee leaves and they're removed from Windows, they're automatically removed from the laboratory software. Key part of the FDA regulations is looking at password complexity and change intervals, and they really relate to electronic signatures, which are typically a username and password. And rather than configuring this independently in an independent system in the lab, if we use Active Directory, then we're linking into whatever your current corporate or organization password policy is. So it saves a lot of time. And as I mentioned, you won't have independent systems in the lab to manually manage and create additional procedures where when an employee joins or leaves, you need a further procedure to add or remove them to a lab system. It's a lot of work, and it's also a risk in that it could be missed. It's very convenient for users because they will only need their normal Windows credentials. They won't need an additional username and password to use the system. So Active Directory integration is very, very useful. We mentioned security rights and permissions, and the requirement to restrict how users are managed and actually separate them from those people that actually perform tests. So the sort of typical setup we would use, and is the default in the NextGen Plus software, is that we split it into 4, and you do have the possibility to make it more granular and have additional groups. But from a high level, what we have is a group who are managing users, adding, removing users to the system, modifying their permissions. This is managed by IT. And if we manage it by IT, then we're following your organization's policies. And as we discussed near the beginning on 21 CFR Part 11, compliance is a combination of the software plus your organization's IT processes. This is a key one to separate those features. We then dive into the actual lab software itself, and then we would have, for example, a supervisor group who would create test methods, report templates, and deploy them. Once those are deployed, we would have analysts who actually perform tests in the lab. So they would measure the glide force on a syringe or the seal strength of a packaging, heat seal packaging. And then we may have an additional group who are not allowed to perform tests, but they will review the work that's been done by the analysts and sign off on it. So that's the typical segregation of the permissions and rights. So let's see that in action. We'll start on the first section of actually our worked example and we're going to use the NextGen Plus software as a platform just to demonstrate how we can use user group permissions and Active Directory. So we're starting what we call the security module, which is the administration of the software. We add and remove users. I mentioned this is IT. What we're doing now is entering IT admin, local admin passwords so that only IT can access this. So we've removed access for users. This is the basic setup screen. I won't go into too much detail. That's where we're linking up to your organization's SQL server to store the data securely. But here's where we're adding and removing users on the left-hand side here. We've got access to the domain users, the Windows users, and here we've got groups, and each group has permissions. And what we've done here is we've restricted the permissions for the analysts. When we're looking at data integrity, a key place to start is actually to stop people doing something you don't want them to do in the first place, rather than spending time logging it and auditing it. So actually restricting permissions goes a long way to ensuring data integrity. And then we've got a group at the end here of supervisors who have got the majority of permissions. And that can be mixed and matched. It's very granular in the software. And you can create additional groups. So that's how the user management and group permissions are managed. And that's a key area defined in 21 CFR Part 11. We mentioned electronic signatures earlier. This is absolutely critical. In this case, an electronic signature is a unique combination of username and password. In general, we're actually linking into Active Directory. So the Windows Active Directory credentials are used to authenticate work. The key thing as well in the FDA regulations is that when changes are made, we should be forcing the user who made the change not only to sign off and electronically sign using their Windows credentials, but we should be forcing them to enter a reason why that was done. So electronic signatures are absolutely critical and something to look for when you're looking for laboratory software. The last area from our ALCOA principles is really to look at the audit trail to see what's happened. So there are many features of an audit trail, but these are some of the key features to look for. Is the audit trail logging configuration changes? And more than logging the actual change, it is absolutely critical that we log the values before and after. And we'll see this during our worked example. So we want to log changes to user management and permissions. So if we add and remove users or change permissions, this should be in the audit trail. The timestamps in the modern world need to include the time zone. The full name of the user responsible should be logged. That is effectively the electronic signature. There must be reasons for changes and reasons for aborted tests, for instance. Also critical that any failed login attempts should be logged in the database. And then back to the ALCOA principles, it needs to be stored securely, and typically that would be done in an SQL database. The advantage there is that an organization's IT department can manage that database securely and keep it secure under its own, your own organization's security protocols. That's electronic signatures and audit trails. So what we're going to do next is look at the workflow to see how that all hangs together. We've looked at the workflow where we configured the groups and the users with their permissions. So let's see what happens when we actually perform tests and go through the workflow. So the first thing we're going to do is imagine that we're a supervisor and we're developing a test method to measure the glide force on a syringe. The glide force is the force required to push the plunger down on a syringe and continue it pushing down. And we're going to look at developing the method, and we're going to see how we log changes with the before and after values, and we're going to look at how we approve that test method and deploy it to the analysts. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into the NextGen Plus. Again, we'll use that to demonstrate the data integrity features. First thing that's going to happen is we have to log into the software. The software, we need to know who did what and when, so we need to log in. This is our Active Directory login, a Windows login. And we've logged in here as a supervisor who has permission to develop test methods. And in the essence of time, what I'm going to do is just modify an existing method, just make a quick change so that we can see how data integrity is ensured. So we're going to edit the test method for this syringe test, and we're going to change the value here from 1 to 2. And then we can follow it through in the audit trail later. So we've changed that value, and we've decided that's the method we want to use. We enter a reason for that change. And we've electronically signed and entered the reason. And that is all stored in the audit trail. And the next thing we're going to do is deploy this to the analyst. So we're going to approve this test method. An analyst is not allowed to perform any tests or cannot perform any tests in the software unless the method has been approved. So we're signing off that we've approved. That's now approved, and now we're going to create a test template, an approved template, which the analysts can use to do their work. So we're going to call the template glide force. Here we're going to have a look at the audit trail to see what happened. So we can see here in this audit record that we've logged that the value changed from 1 Newton to 2 Newtons. We've got the full name of the person that made the change in there. And in the background here, you can see there are many entries into the audit trail. And here we've got an audit trail record to show who approved the test method. So we've made the change, and it's all logged in the audit trail. So now that we've actually deployed that test method, we can actually log in as an analyst and perform a test. So we're going to open the software. But this time we're going to log in as an analyst, and the analyst has reduced permissions. Effectively, the configuration here is the analyst can perform approved tests only. So the analyst is going to create a new file from a template, and we're going to use that glide force template, which has been approved. So we've made the template, and we're going to start the test, and the machine is going to very slowly compress the syringe, and we're going to measure the force versus the distance moved. So here we go, the force is increasing, the plunger started moving, and now we're measuring the glide force, the force to maintain the movement of the syringe. The test is completed. And now this is where data integrity comes in. The analyst is going to improve that test run, and they're adding their electronic signature to that data. And also there will be a log in the audit trail. So here's the data for that test. We've logged various things such as the software version, so there's traceability. We've got the forces there, the results. And there's more data integrity features across here where we can actually see who approved the test method. So there's good traceability. We can see where the test method came from, which version number it was, who approved it. And we've got a log there of who actually performed the test. If we look at the audit trail of what we've just done, we can see, again, lots of detail in the audit trail when people logged in, when they logged out. And here we've got a log that the test was created. And then the final step is to look at a report to see the data, but not only the data, but look at the traceability. So here's a report which shows the date and time. We've got the name of the person that approved the test. That's their electronic signature. There's their electronic signature, their full name. We've got the test results. Below that, we've got the graph. Then below the graph, we've got some really critical data integrity information. So we've got a record there of who printed the report. We've got a record of who approved the test method. And we've also got an entry here for the name, the full name, and date and time, and reason for the person that reviewed that work. And then we also have some critical traceability information, which refers to the accuracy. So the load cell serial number and so on. So you can trace it back to a calibration certificate. So that covers the accuracy part of ALCOA. What we've seen there is 21 CFR Part 11 and data integrity, some of the key features, and we've looked at a worked example of the glide force to see how we maintain data integrity. So really, in summary, what we need to look for with laboratory instrument software is, can we find out what happened, when, where, who made changes, and why did they do it? And if we're going to do that, the first things we should look for are features such as method approval, electronic signatures, Active Directory integration. Audit trails are critical, especially showing the before and after values for any changes. And data security is absolutely key. So those are some of the features to look for. But just as importantly, it's really critical that you look for solid technical support and a deep understanding of data integrity from the supplier. Because as we discussed at the beginning, 21 CFR Part 11 is not all about the application software. It's about an organization's procedures and IT and systems and how they all interact. So we need to be able to look at all of those and see how we can ensure that an organization can meet the requirements. That reaches the end of the presentation. I'll hand over now to the participants for any questions and answers. I can see one question in the chat about remembering the password should not be asked. What we have in the software is we don't remember the password, but there's the Windows function to remember the username rather than password. That's certainly not remembered in any system. You're correct. There don't seem to be any further questions there, so it leaves me to say thank you very much for joining us. And if you have any further questions after this, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.